Good evening. Boy, it's hard to believe that November's almost gone already. And our classes will be coming to an end in just 2 more sessions. That's for me anyway. Not for everybody. We've got more classes, but I do appreciate y'all staying with me on this, and that your comments and encouragement have been appreciated well from me for sure. So I do want to say thank you while we had the opportunity to do that. Next week, of course, we've got our Thanksgiving services, and then there's just one class after that. So we're going to try to combine, maybe finish up what we had on the abortion question this evening, and then move into the next and last one, and we'll see what happens with that. So the less I talk about that, the quicker we get into it. So let's just do that. The abortion question, pro-life or pro-choice. Let's see if I'm at the right spot. Nope, that's not the right spot. Can you take me down to about slide 64?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. I think that's where I stopped it before, so we'll see what happens. It's about what if the mother's life is threatened. These are some of the questions we still have left. And some folks have asked me about it, and I said, well, we're going to get to it. This is the lesson to do so. And so we're going to do that in just a second, and we'll give Charles a chance to catch our electronics up. That's not, is that the one? Nope, that's not quite far enough, Guy, I'm sorry. This is what if the mother's life is threatened. Can you find that on that schedule? There we go, that's the one I'm looking for. Okay, question that we still have is what if the mother's life is threatened? We didn't talk about that in general, but modern medicine has made so many advances today that it's really seldom necessary to save the mother's life. It does happen, but it's a lot more in the minority than in the majority any longer. I remember not when I was born, but at the time that I was born, that if your baby had any complications, it was pretty much a done deal. There wasn't anything they could do about it. Now they can not only help the mothers, but the babies as well, at least at a certain point. But it's not necessary, but like in tubal pregnancies, it's justified sometimes to use the medical precautions to save the mother's life. It's not exactly abortion on demand. It's not the same. This is an abortion for basically a life-for-life situation. We have to take the lesser of 2 evils, so to speak, when that happens, when the mother's life is threatened. So it's the lesser of 2 evils, and the right to defend or preserve the right. There's been a scripture that's been used is Exodus 22, 2 and 3, where it speaks there of when one life is threatened, as in the life of the mother, one has a right to preserve it based on killing in self-defense. For me, that's a pretty loose interpretation of that scripture, because it's not exactly intended for the abortion and mother's safety, but that's one that is used in its defense. So I thought I would bring it forward to you this evening. Do half of all the conceptions spontaneously abort? This has been said that, well, they'll do it automatically if there's something wrong. It doesn't always happen that way. It fails to make a distinction between the spontaneous death and an abortion. There's quite a bit of difference when you're talking about aborting a child and one that would spontaneously abort for whatever reason that might be medically. 100% mortality in the terminally ill. That's not the babies, of course. We're talking about people. And if your mortality rate and you're terminally ill, we still don't go in and kill that person because they're going to die anyway. And this is kind of the philosophy we use sometimes for abortion. Well, the baby's going to die anyway, so let's just get rid of it. And so you can see there's a double standard there. We wouldn't do it to grown-ups, but we will sometimes do that to babies. God's always a sovereign over life. He's the one that decides death and life, not us. Actually, it's not the human being's job to do that. Sometimes we have to do that, but that's not our real job. That's God's job. Next question, if all fertilized ova are human, then shouldn't we save them all? Well, there's no moral obligation for us to interfere with natural death. Now, there is an obligation for us to interfere with death if we can. If there's something good, as Carrie has told me so many times, that if we can do something for someone, that's okay. But if we can do just doing it to someone, that's not okay. Same way with babies. If we can do something for those babies, that's good. But if we're just doing it to those babies, all we're doing is making them suffer for a longer period of time. So, good thought. And I told her I was going to use that sometime through here. So I finally got to it, Gary. If all fertilization ova are human, shouldn't we save them all? Protecting life is a moral obligation. God appoints death for all. Romans 5:12 and Hebrews 9:27 gives us that explicitly. Some fertilized ova don't have 46 chromosomes. Now, that's getting into the scientific end, I realize. But it is important because you're supposed to have the same amount from the father and the mother, that probably drove them crazy at home. But they usually have 45 chromosomes, one less than normal, and that's called the Turner's syndrome. So if you see that, that's what happened. They're one short chromosome. The other extreme of it is some have 47 chromosomes, and that's one extra. That's the Down's syndrome. And at one time, that was almost a death sentence if they were born with Down syndrome or with Turner's syndrome. But it's not the case, I don't think, any longer. So kill all with genetic imperfections? That's the question. And I don't think that we would want to kill children or adults for having genetic imperfections. So most of those affected with imperfections really wouldn't want you to kill them to begin with if they had their say-so about it. Yeah, go ahead and kill me because I got things wrong with me. They wouldn't do that, and we wouldn't either. And that will bring, no, it won't quite bring it to a close, because I did want to give you some facts on, the amazing creation, the fetus. Real quickly, we'll go through that. I think I had that on your handout. You may still have that with you, but if you don't, we'll go over it real quickly. The amazing creation is the fetus. It's really amazing, and Carrie will probably tear me apart with my statistics here when we get back home. But the first month is Actualization month. Okay, this is when all the human characteristics are present. The conception, of course, is when that happens, when the sperm and the egg get together, and that conception and the heartbeat begins. It's usually this is in the first week of conception. The heart muscles start to pump in about 3 weeks. They nest that first week in the placenta, and then the heartbeat takes over at 3 weeks. They can actually hear it now with their equipment. It's very, very faint, but it's there. And some places say that this is where life begins, because when the heart stops, death occurs. So they figure when the heart starts, then life occurs. So you can kind of draw that from wherever you would like to, whether it's your conception of that or not, that's okay. Her heart muscles, we mentioned that the appendages begin to appear, the little nubs for the arms and legs. And the strange part about it is if you look at that at this stage, they look the same as a frog or a cat or whatever. They all look the same. But they're not the same because of that DNA process and those chromosomes that's in there that will eventually develop that all out. But they all start in that particular aspect. The second month, things begin to develop. And it's kind of interesting because this is where the brain waves can be detected in 40 to 42 days. At least that's what they claim. Now, I don't know if that's, again, I'm getting this statistics from, not from me, but from the CDA and all those guys. So the nose and the ears and the eyes and the toes appear during the second month of development. A lot of things happen in that second month. The heart beats with their own blood type. So it's not just, if they're O positive or B positive, whatever. They get that by the end of the second month. They'll already have established that. And the skeleton and the fingerprints develop in that second month, which is always interesting to me. All fingerprints are different, and yet here they are at that second month being developed. Also sensitive to the touch on the lips with, they do this, of course. They actually perform surgeries, and I don't know if it's that early or not. You know, Care? Do they perform surgery at 2 months? Could, yeah, I guess. But they're sensitive to the touch on the lips. They have reflexes. They are, I think, are sensitive to light at that point. All the body systems are present and functioning, and that one I had to doubt just a little bit because not all the systems are developed. The brain is beginning to develop, but all the circulatory system and all that stuff still has to go with some more development at that point. The third month, movement begins. This is where the mothers begin to feel the baby moving around inside. It can swallow, it can squint when they shine a bright light in there on them, and they swim, which is very kind of interesting. No aqua lung or anything. They can just go ahead and swim in that womb. All right, go next one. Uh-oh. Froze up on me, Charles. There we go. They can grasp with their hands, and they can move their tongue. I saw one on not the Instagram, the sonogram, that's it. And he was going, not really, he didn't really stick his tongue out that way, but they can move their tongue. And they suck their thumb at that age, at third month. They feel organic pain. From 8 to 13 weeks, they can begin to feel pain. That's kind of an eye-opener for me, if it's that early. When we're talking about abortion, and some of the claims is it doesn't hurt. If they can feel pain, I'm not sure if that's the case or not. That's just my, again, opinion, and I'll leave it there. On the fourth month, the growth really begins. The weight increases 6 times to half of its birth weight by the end of the fourth month. So if you're measuring, maybe that'll give you, if you ladies out there are somewhere pregnant now and want to know, well, if you're in your fourth month, the baby's halfway to its birth weight. So if it weighs 8 pounds at 4 months, you're in trouble. So it's coming. Grows up to 8 to 10 inches long at this point and can hear the mother's voice. And this is so important from what I understand from child development classes that we had to take when we were doing our daycare. And it was very important for the mothers to talk and sing to their babies because their babies heard this and recognized the mother's voice before it ever comes forth from the womb. It knows mom already. And dads, it can hear their voice too if you get close enough. So it's kind of something that helps you bond with that baby even before it gets here. The fifth month is viability. This is when we decide that it can probably survive outside of the womb. This is about the 24th. No, I guess it'd be the fourth month, wouldn't it? 24 weeks, 25 weeks. So this would be about the end of the fourth month. The fifth month starts. The viability, whether or not they the girl, it's 22, from what I understand, 22 to 25 weeks is called periviable. Is that right? Did I say it right? Periviable, okay. That means that they can possibly survive outside the womb. But at 22 weeks, there's going to be a lot of problems because there's a lot of things that have not developed and will have to develop outside that womb, and that's going to be very, very tough. And I don't think the survival rate is real great at 22 to 25 weeks. After that, then it kind of increases and gets a little bit better. But in the 5th month, the skin and hair and nails develop, and they dream. The RME, which is, rapid eye movement that they always talk about in your sleep. If you don't have that, you don't sleep very well. You have to get through that part of your sleep cycle. And this is, they can actually dream, and that might be why they kick so much at night for the moms. I remember my girls, both of them, waking me up in the middle of the night. Linda would be leaning up against me, and they'd kick me in the back. And I said, quit that. So they can cry and live outside the womb, again, depending on how far along that is. But hopefully, it's after the 25th week, and they'll have much better chance for survival. But you got to remember, that's only halfway through the scheduled birth date. And this is as far as I took the fetus. All these things have happened in that first 5 months of pregnancy. And these are all times still that are okay in places that allow an abortion to have it done. So has anybody got any questions or comments on the abortion before we move on into our next subject? Yes, Brother Paul.
Your prep, did you find or consider any moral ground for the very small chance of when it comes down to the mother or the baby, and that's really your only choice, let's say? Do you find any moral ground for choosing the mother and not the baby?
Are you asking me for my opinion?
Either.
For your opinion? As far as morally, the only scripture I had, again, was in Exodus 21, I think it was 21, 22, and 23, that they draw that solution because it's protecting the life of the mother. I think it's going to be an individual choice. It would be for me and my wife, if that was the case, we would have to try to decide together. And if that, for me, I would probably do the lesser of two evils and go with the mother. That's, again, my choice. It may be or may not be yours, and that's okay. I will not object to your opinion on it, or vice versa, hopefully. And this was the main thing that I think that we wanted to stress in this class, was that some of these areas, like right there, is an area where there's no cut and dried yes or no. It's kind of in that gray area. And that's the one that you have to decide individually, because you're the one that's going to have to stand before the throne of God and answer why you've done certain things. Everybody is going to have to do that. It's not going to be just me. It's going to be you and your spouse, and God's going to say, okay, you said take the mother, keep the mother, and lose the baby. Why? Why did you decide to do that? He's going to ask us that. He's going to ask us that, and he's going to ask us for everything else as far as that goes too. We're going to stand and give that accountant to God one day. Carrie.
Gary, talk about this way so we can hear you.
In healthcare, when it comes to mom versus baby, we will side with mom. We will do everything we can to protect mom or to help the mom survive. There are rare cases in which the mom wants us to save the baby instead of her, but it is, baby without mom is our priority is the mother.
Okay. Did you get that? In the medical field, at least where Carrie's at, she works with the just in neonatal, which is the 22-weekers and up. And they said when it's that case, they'll usually side with the mother, unless the mother herself says no, you know. It's it's very difficult for the baby to survive without the mother, to be real honest about it. Mike, you had something you wanted to?
Say that if a person's a non-believer, the only moral stance they have is the lesser of two evils. You know, the family needs the mom, whatever, the lesser of two evils. We understand that it's a no-win situation. Somebody's going to die, and we have to make a choice. But as Christians, we can, you know, throw ourselves on the mercy of God. We're living, you know, in His grace, and so you're able to go to God and say, Lord, either way, either way I fall short.
Exactly.
Either way I fall short, and so I need Your mercy, you know, to have mercy on me, and to have mercy, Father, if you're the woman, you know, to have mercy on me, and to have mercy on this baby. And as Christians, at least we have the knowledge that the baby is going to be with God.
Right.
You know, that their life is not being snuffed out forever. We believe there's a life after this life, you know, and so I think it's more comforting to
This physical life is not it. You know, we've got more to look forward to, and even in that, like you said, in that situation, with the when you make the choice as Christians, we still are going to be relying on God's grace, because regardless of which one we choose, you know, we're discontinuing a life somewhere down the line. So, and God is a God of life, not a God of death. He said that many, many times. And so I think we need to be aware of that, and yet that's the wonderful thing, excuse me, that's the wonderful thing about being a Christian, is we have that avenue that we can go to God, and we can depend on His grace, and we can depend on His goodness and His godliness, and we can depend on His understanding. I don't think anyone would be any more aware of that situation than what God would be, knowing what the mother's going through, and as Christians, the prayers that are going up, not just from them, but from the family and from church members. I mean, we've had that happen here, where people would go in and pray for that child to survive. And so, you know, all those prayers are God's already knowing what's going on. But we're still going to give that account when we get there. And the assurance that we have is God's grace, that He's going to be there to forgive and forget if that's His will. And I think that would be His will. He would take care of us. Okay, Johnny.
Bob or Carrie, have you come across any stats on how often that kind of decision has to be made? In other words, I'm told that is a rare occurrence when it's either the baby or the mom.
Right.
Are there any stats?
I didn't get any.
There are, in my world, we have the babies that are viable, right, 22 weeks and above. So it would be like the OBGYN for that numbers early on. So you're talking like tubal pregnancies where the baby would not be like, although if you go by Oklahoma law, conception is the beginning of life, tubal pregnancies, the baby would not survive, period, because it's not developing in the uterus and it would kill mom, right? So we go with mom. We say mom and take out. It is considered an abortion by terminology, but not elective, or teen pregnancies they're not uncommon by any means. When you get into the further stages of pregnancy, 5 months is 22 weeks and beyond. Moms likely in danger, they would just deliver baby. So you have preeclampsia, which is
Which makes it rare, is what you're saying.
Right.
For it to be, at that age, yes.
It's rare.
We do encounter a lot of situations where babies are, we have the technology, which is sometimes an advantage and a disadvantage, to know early on when they have where it's a lethal anomaly, where they will not make it after delivery. And then in those cases, it's again up to the mother if she wants to terminate prior to, or if she wants to deliver. So I do see a lot of that where it's,
Sure.
after the fact. But
So basically, it's not that often that happens as far as the mother and the child. And especially third trimester, that helps out. But, yeah. Oh, you get, Becky just looked up 8%. I'm glad I got daughters. About 8% of all the pregnancies, that's not very many, I don't think. Is it, Doc, you think? No? You just gonna shake your head? You don't have any?
I agree with Carrie on all of this. Two pregnancies, hard to make you, they can't survive,
Yeah.
but it is rare. In my career, when I was delivering babies, I think we only had two. I only had two, and I delivered a little over 100 babies in my residency. So it is rare.
So miscarriage is 70%, what? Yeah,
That's,
70%?
that's what I heard one time. Of all fertilized eggs, only 20% are making babies.
Right.
10% non-viable.
If it doesn't nest in that placenta, it's not gonna happen, so. Okay, anybody else before we leave this thing? Uh-oh, Carrie? She's been waiting, yeah.
I think that the problem with the abortion argument is that it's taken to the extremes on both sides. And at this stage of the game, with social media, with our political divide that we have, it is going to, you give them an inch and they take a mile, whether you're right or left. So common sense is no longer a picture, and it's become so divided, and so people are just flat out mean to one another when they don't agree with one another. And this is not just an abortion, this is in any issue. And I think as Christians, whatever side you are on, I think that it is important for us to approach everything in love. And if you've ever known somebody who's had an abortion, or you've gone through it yourself, it is not pleasant. It is very traumatizing for those mothers, whether you're 15 or whether you're 35 and you decided to terminate because your baby had problems or legal anomalies. And I think that all of these people need love and not judgment. And I think that's where we need to come in. And rather than cast judgment on them and say, you're wrong, you're absolutely wrong, I think sometimes we just need to, we're supposed to be the light.
Yeah, we're the light, and to me, we're not necessarily condoning, but we ought to be there to be support, regardless of which side that they take. I think that's part of our job as Christians, loving one another. We need to be there for that other person, and not just an abortion, but the Scripture says we're to bear one another's burdens, and what greater burden would you have to do than to help somebody that's going through this? And if you've had an abortion, and I'm speaking from a man's side, I understand, but I don't think women ever get over it. I don't think they ever get over a miscarriage. Anytime you lose that baby for whatever reason it might be, women especially never get over it. Men, I think we adjust to it to a degree, but to a woman, this is her function. And that sounds chauvinistic. I don't mean for it to, but I mean, that's, God designed women to bring babies into the world. And thank goodness he didn't give it to us men. If we'd only have one kid, that'd be it. It would never be any more after that. Because I've been through deliveries with two of them, and I know good and well it wouldn't happen for the second time if it was mine, my job. But that being said, thank you all for your got one back here? Yes, go ahead. I can't see what it is.
I was just going to say, with the percentage, like everybody has already pointed out, is small. As a Christian, we have to be knowledgeable and, of course, do everything in love. But we have to understand the biblical teaching on abortion, if it's right or wrong. Everything we do is in love. But Jesus still gave us rules and laws for us to abide by that I think we need to stay on top of, stay studied up in, and have a good understanding so that when it's not this gray area, when it's something for birth control, or oops, I made a mistake, or I made the wrong choice to get into the bed with the individual as opposed to keep the baby, we have to have a righteous judgment.
That's true. And again, we go back to, we know that God is a God of life and not the God of death. He didn't bring death into the world. Sin brought death into the world. It wasn't God that decided to do that. It happened, and God says, I'm still the God of life and always will be. Not just this life, but eternal life. And so we have to use that as part of our register, I think, as you were saying. The biggest thing is that we understand that not everybody is going to have our point of view. And in that part, that's when we have to use love to deal with it. If that's the only way we can deal with it. If we don't do it that way, then we have not only lost them, but we've endangered ourselves as well. Paul.
I think the trick is finding a bit of a balance. I mean, Christ is our model, so you could not say that anywhere in Scripture that Christ would dilute, fudge, or be loose with any doctrine or command that the Lord had given. However, he would also break bread and fellowship with prostitutes and tax collectors and all these people that had open sin, that were socially at the last rung, and he would have exchanges with them. Most of his animosity or arrows, whatever you want to call them, they were for the religious leaders. They were those that were using religion for their own ends, for power. That's what, when you see Christ get really angry or judge them, you brood of vipers, whatever. It wasn't towards the prostitute. It wasn't towards the woman on her sixth husband, or whatever. He loved those people. So the trick is, how do you love them while maintaining that standard? And I think a big part of that is you hold yourself to that standard, you live that, and that is going to speak way louder than debating somebody in the open square why they're wrong and why they're going to hell. So, I don't know, it always goes back to Christ. He was the perfect model for us.
Absolutely, yes, he was. That was the thing that was always amazing to me, is that he was so kind and loving to everyday people, if I can use that. And yet when the religious leaders came around, it was like, hey, you know better. You call you on the carpet. Bobby?
I'm going along with what he was talking about. You always would end up, go and sin no more. You acknowledge their sin, you point out their sin. But he just said, don't do it anymore. And that's what we need to do. So, you're good, you made a mistake. Let's not do that again.
Back in the back, way back.
Since we've been on this subject, I reached out to my daughter, and she gave me a contact that she knows people involved in, and she was considering it too someday. It's been just kind of rolling around her head, but I reached in. I saw the lady at a basketball game here a couple nights ago, and asked her about her ministry. Now, it's not in our brotherhood, but their church has a group of ladies that get together once a month, with women that come in contact, that's gotten pregnant and they didn't want it, they were looking for their options, and they said, we'll help you through this. And so they meet with, they may be in all stages of pregnancy, but they'll all get together once a month, and I don't know that they necessarily supply any monetary value, but I know that they try to help them through it and be supportive for them all the way through the pregnancy, so they can have, some moral support to make it through. And so I just thought that was interesting, and I said, I might talk to a couple ladies in this congregation if they're ever interested in saying, maybe we could have a ministry that they could actually go, how does, I could give them contact and say, this is it. Go talk to them and say, how does this work? What do you guys do to help? And how come? Because they're starting, not a big congregation at all, but not that big. People reach out to them all the time. And so they have quite a few ladies, people that come to them and get that moral support throughout the pregnancy. So anyway, it's lifting a finger to help somebody say, hey, we'll help you. And I'm sure they supply places to go, adoption agencies and things to say, okay, you can go to this adoption agency, and then that's how they find their, it could be private, it could be, typically it's going to be private if you're doing it way ahead of time. But anyway, it's just a thought, it's just something roll around, just plant the seed out there,
Then you say we can get in touch with you for that?
You can't get in touch with me, but I can get them in touch, if they want to talk to me, yes, then I can get them in contact with two ladies or two young women that do that ministry at their church.
Okay, thank you. So if you want to clear that a little bit more with Don and get a hold of him after services or any time, I'm sure he'll be willing to talk to you he's on Facebook a lot. And so anyway, thank you again for this time. We're getting pretty good. Well, we still got time. We can start with the other. It's funny, when we're talking about abortion, I think I mentioned this last week, that Rome was so good with it, and they were doing it at the time of Christ. It's interesting that nothing was put in the scriptures about it, that particular thing. I mean, abortion is not mentioned, but it was, you would think that would be something that would be of a subject. But again, it goes back to Jesus with his love, and he's saying, we cherish life, we'll try to do the best we can. Back here, I see a hand. I can't see who it is, but.
It's Jamie.
Okay, Jamie, speak up for me, please.
So, I can remember being a teenager. I mean, as you're growing up and getting into high school, of the world, right? And that abortion was a thing. And knowing that I did not agree with it because of my beliefs. And I remember watching an episode of Star Trek Deep Space Nine where one character was pregnant and they were in a shuttle crash. And she was 4-ish, 5-ish months along and was going to lose that baby. And there was a Bajoran on board who was able to have that baby transplanted into her and then carry that baby to birth. Yeah, to term, thanks. And I can remember thinking, wow, I mean, there are so many people with fertility problems, there are so many people who want to adopt, or just that want to have the baby, and then people that didn't. Why couldn't we do something like that? And of course, at 15 years old, I didn't understand medically that that's not possible. But I can remember thinking, that is absolutely amazing, and I wish people had that option available. But I just, how many lives would be saved if we were able to do a fetus transplant,
I'm sorry. Most of the cases that we've been discussing in this class, though, have been where there is a choice to do so, where in reality that's not always the case. There are people that there are teenagers, for instance, that have had to have an abortion because mom and dad said so, and we're not going to raise the baby, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So again, it goes back to, sometimes those mistakes are made and we can't control it. The biggest problem is not really the babies and the abortion. The biggest problem goes a little further back than that, and that's with the illicit sex that goes on. And the majority of the things we've been talking about that for people to abort have been due to kind of like birth control. You know, I mean, when you have them coming in the fourth and fifth time for abortions, then that's no longer an issue of it has to be done. This is an issue of you know, I'm not taking any other precautions, and you know, if I have a baby, I'll just go get it aborted. No big deal. Mike?
I think the abortion issue, aside from the abortion issue, you know, the debate over it, it's also the strongest example in preaching the gospel. In preaching the gospel of grace. And you've all heard me say this before, but when you're teaching somebody the gospel and you want to explain to them, you know, how gracious God is, people have a tendency of wanting to go back and fix their sins and, you know what I mean, make up for what they did wrong back, you know. And I've heard people say, well, I'm going to fix up my life and then I'm going to become a Christian, you know. And I said to them, there's no amount of fixing you can do to become a Christian, you know. So the point I'm making is a lot of times I've used abortion. Okay, let's say never mind you were 15 and your parents, you were 23 years old, it was a party night, you just decided to have, you know, sex with the good-looking guy that was there at the party, and you never saw him again, and whoops, you're pregnant. Now what are you going to do? Well, you just went ahead and had an abortion, you know, just to get rid of the thing, because it was, you know, it would have messed up your life. And then 4 or 5 years later, someone shares the gospel with you, and you realize, you know, you're a sinner, and you want to become a Christian, and so on and so forth. And you realize, I can't go back and fix that abortion. And there's nothing I can give God, nothing that I can give Him in exchange for what I have done, you know, in taking the life of an innocent baby that I was carrying. This is where people begin to really understand God's grace. The death of Jesus on the cross makes restitution for what you did. Amen. Whether it's you had an abortion or whatever. For the guys, you know, when you were in college, you got drunk and you raped a girl or something like that, date rape or something. You know, how are you going to fix that? You can't fix that. Yeah, you can't go back and fix it, you know. And so I think that we can use the abortion argument, whatever, not only in convicting people that they were wrong, but also in demonstrating how gracious God is. That despite those things that we may have done, He still forgives us, and He still removes that sin from our hearts and from our minds and from our conscience. You know, we're no longer guilty of that thing.
That takes us almost back to the very first one we were talking about capital punishment, the same way.
Yeah.
Somebody commits murder, you know, God's grace can cover that if they choose to do so. You know, I've often, you know, we talk so much about Jeffrey Dahmer, I know, and then, you know, people say, well, yeah, I think he was just thinking it, you know, just kind of, but I really didn't care. If I thought he was seeking God, then good for him. You know, hopefully that's what was in his heart. I don't know that. God knows that.
Right.
But I know that if he was sincere about it, God would forgive him for it. And so I don't have any business, you know, taking God's place. That's up to Him. And the same way with all this that we've been talking about, it's God's judgment, God's decision in the end that's going to count. It's not what I think or anybody else thinks or what their opinions are or anything else. It's going to be God's judgment. And unfortunately, everything we see in the Scriptures points to grace, points to forgiveness, points to God loving His creation. And brothers and sisters, that's you and me. And I'm thankful for that, and I thank God for that. particular thing.
Real quick, 'cause I know the second bell, but I think it's almost a little ironic that the way God devised to save all of us was to knowingly send his son as a human to have him killed. He knew that that was going to happen before he created the world. He had to have the plan before, knowing, hey, I'm going to create all these beings, I'm going to give them free will, make them in my own image, give them the right to choose, but there's still a universal law that separates right from wrong, and that there has to be a payment made for all of these wrongs, for all this sin. And he still went ahead and created all of us. He still went ahead and sent his son into the creation, still let them murder him. And it's through death that this whole thing, through the death of a perfect life, that this whole thing, that we even have a recourse, we even have this grace. It's just kind of ironic that it was an act of death that.
I don't mean to be flippant, but that's the perfect example of lesser of two evils. Either Jesus dies or we die, and he chose that his son would die so we wouldn't have to. God bless you all. Have a good week. And next week we're going to take on, next lesson, we'll take on civil disobedience. Is it okay to riot? Well, maybe not riot, but